woke phenomenon only sharpens a tendency that already existed. All the sort of left-wing governments strongly shielded Islam from criticism. I've seen the change happening in about the mid-90s. So until then, leftist intellectuals were typically anti-church, and they automatically transferred this to the issue of Islam. So when Salman Rushdie was persecuted in 1989, most leftist intellectuals were on his side and against the Ayatollahs. But today, if the same thing were to happen, I'm afraid that it would be the reverse. And so you see this in other issues, like, for instance, about the hijab. I see in Belgium there is one Iranian member of our parliament who strongly supports this opposition of Iranian women. Well, you see, most of our official feminists and so on don't want to have anything to do with it or find excuses for Islam. That tendency was already there for at least 25 years, and which has to do with what you also described, the rise of right-wing movements. You see, right-wingers used to be rather pro-Islamic, often nastily because of the anti-Jewish angle. And so those were people who were still not nostalgic of the Nazi era and so on. Those people have died out. And anyway, they discovered, you see, that the people on the street had no problem, particularly with the Jewish community, but had more and more problems with the Muslims. So they changed tack, and because of that, the leftists, who were more against them than against, well, whatever position vis-a-vis Islam, then decided to side with Islam. And so that tendency has grown stronger and stronger. Like you had the case of Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, who put on hijab and so on. So this tendency is quite strong. A seeming exception is France, where President Macron supported a number of the victims of Islamic terrorism, the teacher and the pressman who had supposedly offended Islam. But on the whole, you see, he's not fundamentally changing the situation. And so that's where you have the rise of right-wing parties. In the case of Italy, they actually took power. In the case of Sweden, they are supporting the government from the opposition, but so the government more or less toes their line. In other countries, you see, and this is a development I find really healthy, that other parties are taking over this Islam critical line. Like in Austria, the Socialist Party, that has always patronized policies that ultimately benefited Islam, now is taking the feedback from its own voters that now we really have to do something about this. So I hope that is the future, that more and more parties are going to take this issue to heart, though at the same time I think it's pretty late in the day to do so. So you see, to some extent the growth of Islam is assured, partly by immigration, partly by higher birth figures. They're not dramatically high, but always higher than the corresponding non-Muslim groups. Same in India. And inevitably, probably earlier in Europe than in India, but in both places, in, let's call it, the western subcontinent of the Eurasian landmass and the southern subcontinent, in both of them, by end of the century, you will have a Muslim majority.